Hello, everyone, and thank you again. We're going to get started in about 1 minute. So as we take this time to have everybody finish logging in, feel free to put where you're calling in from today over in the chat box on the right-hand panel. All right, let's give everybody about 30 more seconds, and then we'll get started. Just be respectful of everybody's time. Let's see, people are still logging in and coming in from all over the world. Thank you so much for filling out where you're coming from in the chat box. It's great to see everybody here. All right, it's 2 o'clock, so let's get started. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the webinar, The Democratization of Knowledge and Learning. We have a full house today, so we have people coming from all over, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We have everybody coming in here today to hear two visionary leaders discuss the democratization of knowledge and learning, which is brought to you by EdCast and the 70-20-10 Institute. To introduce myself, I'm Jeffrey Roth. I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at EdCast, and we'll be moderating today's webinar. I'm very excited for today's topic, as I'm sure you are too, and I'm absolutely honored to welcome the two guests we have speaking today. First, I'll start with Charles Jennings. Charles is a world-renowned leader for his work on international learning and workplace performance. He's co-founder of the 70-20-10 Institute and co-owner of the Duntroon Consultants Limited, and a member of advisory boards and steering groups for businesses around the world. Welcome today, Charles.
Very much, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here.
Happy to have you. And next we have Karl. Karl Mehta. He's currently the founder and CEO of EdCast, the revolutionary AI-powered knowledge cloud solution driving high-performance teams and organizations of all sizes. He's a serial entrepreneur, author, investor, engineer, and was selected as a White House Presidential Innovation Fellow. Welcome, Karl. All right.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Well,
thank you for being here. This is going to be a great topic today. So just a few housekeeping points. Charles Jennings will start, followed by Karl Mehta. I'll help moderate any of the questions that you guys want to pop into the Q&A sections. We're going to try to allocate some time at the end to be able to go through them, and I'll coordinate those and respond as best as possible, but we will address as many of them as possible towards the end, and if there is a limited time, we'll follow up offline. And speaking of that, this webinar will be recorded. So what I will do is make sure everybody gets a recording of the webinar and a version of the presentation today sent out to them later in the week. So with that, let's get started. Let me hand it over to Charles. Charles, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Well, hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be here today to look at some of the issues around the democratization of knowledge and learning. And I thought that probably the best way to start was really with something you don't need me to explain, that the world's changing. You know, we all know that. But it's changing in some very, very interesting ways that are extremely relevant to the world of learning and performance. And in relation to knowledge, how we develop it, how we get access to it, and how we share it, all of those things I think are very relevant. And so take, for example, the changes we've seen in the value that's placed on learning and knowledge, basically on people, over the last 40 or 50 years. So Standard & Poor's top 500 entities by market value tells us a story about the criticality of people and their capability. So if you look at this graph here, it shows the relative proportion of tangible assets, that's building, plant, equipment, and so on, relative to intangible assets, that's essentially intellectual property, brand value, and basically what's in the heads of the people employed by these firms. So in 1975, more than 80% of the assets of the S&P 500 were tangible. By 2015, that had flipped. It had dropped to less than 15. Now, of course, the S&P 500 tracks the 500 largest entities trading on the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, and companies like Apple and Google weren't around in 1975. But the point is that firms that have been smart about using their intangible assets, mostly held in tacit knowledge in the heads of their employees, are the ones that have grown and replaced those that haven't done that. And there is no doubt that this trend is going to continue. When we take a look at those tangible, intangible assets, this tacit knowledge, we all understand again that they tend to have very short half-lives. They constantly need to be renewed. And John Seely Brown, former chief scientist at Xerox PARC, was there for 20 years, oversaw the development of the graphical user interface and the mouse and all those other developments. John, who's now at the Deloitte Center for the Edge, and wrote a tremendous book with his colleagues John Hagel and Lang Davidson, titled The Power of Pull. He talks about the fact that we're moving from a world of stocks of knowledge, where knowledge was moderately static, to one of flows of knowledge, where new knowledge and refinements of what we know is occurring on an almost daily basis. And Seely, Brown, and Hagel have gone on recently to develop what they call a flow index. We're increasing volumes and speeds of flows of information, of people, of money, and also greater participation in these flows create tremendous opportunities, but only if we learn to use them, of course. And really, traditional learning and development approaches weren't set up to use this whole new and to work in this whole new environment. We certainly know one thing, and that's what got us here is not going to get us there. And if you look at this data here, the Corporate Executive Board carried out a study asking around about 7,000 leaders and managers and a few HR directors this question. They asked them, what performance improvement do you need for your organization and your people to meet your targets in the next 12 months? I'll just say that again. What performance improvements do you need for the organization and your people to meet their targets in the next 12 months? So this is real tactical stuff. And the replies that they gave were quite astounding. The participants suggested that they needed around about a 27% improvements in employee performance to meet their short-term goals. And in fact, the HR directors are the most pessimistic with the highest needs. And then when the executive board researchers looked at the ability of traditional training, classroom training essentially, to meet these needs, they calculated that the maximum uplift and gain would be around 4%. And that's partly because we've become pretty efficient at designing and delivering training. We've honed it to a fine art over the last 100 years or so. So the challenge that we have is essentially what got us here is not going to move us forward. We need new approaches for the totally new working environments that we're all living in today. The old approaches of taking people away from work, putting them through some process and putting them back in work and hoping that magic happens is certainly not appropriate. And part of the reason for this, and the problem we have, is that our systems and approaches for learning and development were designed in an era of information paucity. Books were chained to pulpits and to libraries to keep information available just to the few, not the many. And the teachers defined the curriculum, and they felt they knew what needed to be taught, and they controlled the processes of teaching it. And that process, to be honest, was slow and inflexible. Today, we're living in an era of information abundance. And I don't need to tell anyone here that fact. Today, we have access to virtually all the stored knowledge in the world at the touch of a finger. People go to their doctors armed with more information about their presumed illness than the doctor has. We see this all the time. Of course, they probably haven't seen the symptoms as many times as the doctor has, so the professional still has the edge there, at least for the time being. But what the doctor learned in medical school isn't enough anymore. It's probably not even relevant, a lot of it, if they've been out of medical school for more than 5 years. She or he need to continually refresh their knowledge as part of their work. And when we think about existing L&D practices, again, we see they're not really fit for our needs in the emerging workplace. They're not set up to provide this continual support to help people understand how to do their jobs as best they can. So I think if we're going to overcome all these obstacles, we need a flip. And I think the work that's been done on flipping the classroom in schools is a really good model to think about. We need to flip our mindsets, in fact, from learning in order to work to learning from our work and embedding learning in our work, from moving from a focus around learning to a focus around performance, from focusing on the process to focusing on the outputs. And in fact, we know that learning is the work in knowledge jobs, in knowledge work, no matter whether you work as a nurse or a doctor or a financial controller or a salesperson or a technical developer, learning is actually part of the work we do on a daily basis. So I found that the 70-20-10 approach, which I've been involved with for 20 years or so now, I found that to be very helpful to make this move from learning to work to learning from work and learning from others. And we know a few things about this. We know that people learn more about their jobs in the workplace than they ever do in the classroom. And that L&D's role is fundamentally about helping people, both individuals and as teams, to do their jobs better. So we need to look at how we can support people in the flow of work. We know too that novices, people who are new to an organization or new to a role, will need some structure to get started. They don't, however, need the 12-week onboarding programs that I've seen over the years. In fact, I've seen some organizations remove their onboarding programs altogether or embed them into their devices, where people starting in a new organization are given an iPad or some device and told everything they need is there. Meet up once a week with your colleagues, talk about how you're going, share, and get on with it. And I've seen a bit of research that shows that people who do that, particularly in a sales context, actually build greater client engagement than people who go through the traditional onboarding programs. Equally, when we think about veterans, people who've been in their organizations or in their roles for a longer time, they will only rely on learning when they come up against challenges. So if you think about how many of your senior leaders, for example, have been on a course in the past year, the answer is probably very few, if any. And the other answer to that is they don't need it. They know who to go to if they've got a problem they can't solve. They can direct and identify people who can help them do their jobs. We also know that in this mix that formal learning, classrooms and e-learning, work best with explicit knowledge. That's where we know we have defined clarity about information, and that learning as part of work, learning in the workflow, works best with tacit knowledge when we're dealing with new challenges all the time. And in the nature of knowledge work, it's extremely difficult to second guess the challenges that any knowledge worker will come up against any day. So today, to a certain extent, we're swimming in an ocean of tacit knowledge. And it's not just knowledge workers who are doing that. It's also people who are working in transactional roles and all sorts of other roles. We find that there are new situations and there's a requirement for tacit knowledge. We need to know what our exemplary performers are doing. We need to understand how they're solving problems. When I was at Reuters, I was Chief Learning Officer at Reuters for 8 years, we did a lot of work around technical developers, where we simply took them away from the workplace for an hour, for half an hour, just to talk with their colleagues about the challenges that they were facing and how they were solving them. We identified exemplary performers who shared their knowledge. We found it incredibly powerful. In fact, far faster and more powerful than putting them through any number of MCSE and CCNA and technical courses and programs. So there's an uncomfortable truth beneath all of this. And it's a very uncomfortable truth, I believe, for many, many L&D professionals. And the truth is this, that learning is much more likely to be effective and to transfer into increased performance the closer it occurs to the point of use. Again, I think it's worthwhile just pondering on that for a minute. The closer that you learn about something, learn how to do something to the point that you actually use it, the more effective it's likely to be. And there are a number of reasons for this. We all know of Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve, 1886. You know, we forget without context. Any one of us will forget about half of what we've been told within about an hour of being told it. But we know that that it's really important to align learning as closely as possible to the point of use. This little diagram here, which comes from the book that Jos Arets and Vivian Heinen and I wrote about improving performance using the 70-20-10 model, simply shows the realized value, the value that can be realized from learning against the single point solution. In other words, taking people away from work, learning being separate from work, to integrating learning with work. This isn't anything new. There was work done by IBM researchers 10 years or so ago, which showed exactly the same, that on-demand learning realized a lot more value. And when we think about it, it's quite natural. None of us, I'm sure, learned to ride a bicycle because our parents taught us Newton's first law of motion. We learn by practice. We learn by getting on our bike and falling off and making a few mistakes, and we got better at it, and we learned to ride a bike. So this 70-type learning, this learning through experience, through practice, through reflection, and the 20-type learning, learning through and with other people, are likely to be more effective than learning away from the workplace. So you can see that it's not a new idea, but it's really important to grasp in terms of thinking about the democratization of learning and the moving of learning and the responsibility of learning into each and every one of us and each and every one of our colleagues. Now, of course, it helps if we have managers and leaders that can help us and support us, but actually it comes down to a responsibility for us and for our organizations to create the culture that allows continuous learning and development to occur. So if we take a step back and think about high performance, I guess the first question that comes up is, why doesn't everyone perform at their best all the time? Well, in response to that, I think the famous Henry Louis Mencken had an answer to that, which is there's always some well-known solution to every human problem. It's neat, plausible, and wrong. And what Mencken was getting at is the fact that we often jump to conclusions with very quick solutions rather than doing some decent analysis and understanding root causes. All of us who work in learning and performance have seen it many, many times, I'm sure, where someone will come to you and say, we need a course on X. We need a new sales training program. We need a new course. We need to update our leadership program. Without looking at it from the outputs first to understand what the problem is, what is the business problem we're trying to solve here, let's work back and find the most effective way that we can solve it. So if we think back to the distance from the point of use, what sort of 70 and 20 solutions can we provide? It's the same when L&D answers the questions, assuming that because there's underperformance, we need training, whether it's classroom training or learning or whatever, and that'll fix it. And how many of us have also seen a situation where we've run a training program and someone has come to us maybe a year, 18 months later and said, that training program was great, but I think we need to run it again. And the answer to that is, well, maybe we're not looking at this the right way, because high performance is more than just a product of knowledge and skills. In fact, high performance is more than just a product of static knowledge and skills. So let me give you an example. Let me give you a case as to why high performance is more than that. In fact, this slide, we can increment the number of Grand Slams that Rafa Nadal has won by one, as he won the French Open 10 days ago. But Santiago Alvarez Dumont, the gentleman on the bottom left here, is a professor at the ISE Business School in Barcelona. And he's been working with Rafael Nadal since he was a teenager. And his team have been studying what makes Rafa Nadal a great tennis player for years. Their conclusion is that on raw talent alone, Nadal has never, ever been in the top 5 professional tennis players just on talent. But you might ask how this could be. Well, the answer is that Nadal is what I'd call an obsessive reflector. If you watch what he does on the court, you'll see this. He takes his time. He uses learned patterns to give himself just those extra few seconds, that extra 15 seconds, to think about what he did in the last rally or last point, what went wrong, what he needs to correct it for the next one. In fact, Nadal has lost more points for time wasting on service than any professional in the Open era. And the reason for that is he's working, he's learning in the heat of the moment. And again, I often are confronted by people who say, well, we don't have time to reflect. My job is I'm so much under pressure, I don't have time to think about, to step back and think about what went wrong and or what went right and how I can build on that, or what went wrong and what I need to correct. Well, here's a man who's at the top of his game in the world still, who works in an environment of I would argue, probably more pressure than most of us, or all of us work in, and yet he has got a method. He's used a learned behavior to correct his mistakes faster than other players, and that's the reason that he wins Grand Slams. He doesn't get into patterns of making errors. He's also obviously determined and fit and fast, and he's a great athlete, but it's not extreme talent, but extreme reflection that got Nadal to where he is and keeps him where he is. So if we look at how high performers develop, we can see a pattern. We can see that they take control. Their learning is their own. They do it their way. It's really the ultimate democracy where the individual is in control. But to do that, they also have to have the resources and the tools to help them continually learn. There are essentially 5 characteristics, I believe, of development when we look at high performers. And no matter what high performer you look at, when I've held these characteristics up against that individual or that high-performing team or within that high-performing culture in an organization, these 5 characteristics tend to display. First of all, they've exploited any early structured development they've had to master the basics. We need to learn the lessons that structured learning can help us to get underway, but it won't produce high performance. So providing people with learning through courses and e-learning may well help people in a new role, in a new organization, with a new process, whatever, but it will not produce high performance. We need a lot more than that. High performers, secondly, utilize hundreds of hours of practice under guidance. There's nothing better than a good coach or a mentor or identifying an exemplary performer to bring out the best. And practice, especially space practice, is really critical. So having access to the resources, whether that's in other people's heads, whether that's in simply being guided in some way. But all high performers will have had lots of times opportunities to practice under guidance. And again, in the knowledge industry, we tend to forget about practice. We tend to think we don't have time to practice. We don't have time not to practice, in fact. Thirdly, every high performer I've ever met has been embedded in their professional community. Even apparently solitary careers. So if you take, for example, writers, good writers tend to share and learn from their peer group. Even the famous Albert Einstein, who actually wasn't a great mathematician, he was a brilliant thinker, but he had a wife who was a tremendous mathematician and a very good friend who was an extremely good mathematician, and the 3 of them, worked out when Albert was working his conceptual models out, they worked as a team. So rarely you will find individuals, and I would argue that none of us on this webinar today achieve our objectives alone. We require teams. We work in multiple teams all the time. So we need to make sure that we are embedded in our professional community. Fourthly, all high performers have access to on-the-job performance support at their fingertips. In this era, when find or access beats ownership every time, not just in building performance in organizations, but if we look around at all the new initiatives that have developed, the whole new economy that's developed over the last 10 or 15 years, access is more important than ownership. So being able to find the right stuff when we need it and having access to the right stuff is more important, whether that's using a motor vehicle or finding somewhere to stay or whatever. It's all around access to information or to people who know. So performance support is absolutely critical. It's one thing that has really surprised me over the 40 years or so I've worked in this industry is that the concept of providing tools and techniques and content to support people at the point of use hasn't become embedded in the learning professionals' armory. It's still, I think, just coming to fruition that many learning and development people, and I've spent years working with people running executive programs and leadership programs and functional development programs, the idea that if we can move from the concept of courses to the concept of resources, we're going to improve. In fact, I've been working with Citibank, the big US banking corporation, over the last 3 years, who are doing a very good job with their 70-20-10 use, and they've moved from courses to campaigns. That's been one of the fundamental moves. We think about how we can build people and build capability through campaigns as much or more than courses. And the last characteristic of high performers is that they've spent lots of time independently practicing, embracing new experiences, and in reflection. I don't personally buy the 1,000 hours argument, but because that was a sort of a bastardization of the original research. But there is no doubt that without lots of experience, lots of practice, lots of reflection, no amount of knowledge will help deliver high performance. So they're the 5 characteristics that I think are absolutely critical in terms of development in this democratized digital world where information is abundant, where all of us have access to more information through our devices that we have in our purses or our pockets than previous generations had. Without a doubt, in the next 5 or 10 years, it's going to rush at us even faster and faster. So before I hand over to Karl, I just wanted to say finally that a lot of these concepts and ideas we've developed around through the 70-20-10 Institute. So if you'd like to follow up any of these ideas, you can follow them up from blog posts and papers and so on, which are at the 70-20-10 Institute site. So Karl, if I can hand over to you now.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Charles. Those are amazing insights, and I always learn more things from you every time that we talk. So let's build upon what you just said, and we will go into our tactical side of how to actually give the tools to subject matter experts to bring that tacit knowledge. Let me share the application here. Okay, so folks, thank you for joining. And this topic of democratization of knowledge is very important personally for me. Before even I got into the learning space, as a former venture capitalist, I just couldn't do my work and my role daily unless I could tap into the tacit knowledge of my partners and just people sitting right in my office or even all over the world from whom I can learn, because every meeting and every decision was a $5 to $10 million decision about saying yes or no to a Series A or a Series B. And every day I have to explore areas where I have little or no prior knowledge. So I wrote a blog about how important this democratization is, and it's on my LinkedIn, and that inspired sparked off the conversation with Charles and the idea about doing this webinar. I'm going to double click on what Charles mentioned, and he quoted John Seeley Brown about we are moving and shifting from stocks of knowledge to flows of knowledge. If we look at kind of the macroeconomic view of externally how our organizations and companies are shifting from a value chain perspective. So before we hone into the internal capability development, just look at what is the big shift that is happening in the business world. The value chain, and this is a chart from Deloitte University, so credit to them. It's moving from a linear flow of goods to actually becoming more complex, dynamic, but more networked, not one-to-one or one-to-many, but it is moving from many to many. And companies, 50% of S&P 500 companies in the next 5 years will all become a network or a platform company. That's the research from Accenture. So there is the shift that is happening, not just from a linear to network, but also fundamentally we are in a knowledge economy now, and so it is more about the underlying flow of knowledge that is moving companies faster into the ecosystem and network than just the flow of goods and services. Now, if we look at the flow of knowledge, that is what I am seeing, at least at number of Fortune 500, Global 2000 companies, is that we're still, when it comes to learning, we're still in the Web 1.0 world, which means the user is at the very end mainly receiving content, put together by some external course provider, plugged into an LMS, and then it gets assigned. It's very top-down. It's one-to-many. And most of the time, the content could be outdated and has no contextuality or the integration to what the person is working on. And Charles mentioned very brilliantly with various examples about how important it is to bring it to the integrated to the working environment. So what we are seeing as how we have architected or reimagined or redefined learning is more like a network like this. And this is actually a real knowledge graph of just the EdCast employees using our own knowledge network and our own Learning 3.0 platform. So the way we see learning emerging, when we really tap into the tacit knowledge of our experts, it becomes more networked. And that drives more faster growth in terms of the flow of knowledge, so the velocity growth, and so it drives exponentially. And we are able to tap into the collective intelligence, which is very critical to get the knowledge that people already have about the business. And what it really drives is actually more experiential knowledge, because you're tapping into people who have the experience of doing something and have practically done it. You can also, when you create a networked learning, you can drive the relevancy, because now it is no longer about a specific portal or a UI, but your ability to make knowledge and learning appear right at the point of need at any application that a user is working on. And so this is really where we have the ability now to actually take learning from almost 10 to 15 years old Web 1.0 to leapfrog into Web 3.0 if we move from linear to a network model of learning. So with that, I think what we really need is a new metric to define how we can drive faster growth of and the flow of knowledge, and I call it as the velocity of knowledge flow. And I think there are ways that we can all work together in measuring empirically how to design this velocity of knowledge flow. And there are studies out there from our advisor and mentor from Kevin Oakes of I4CP, where high-performance organizations have 4 times the more knowledge flow and knowledge sharing than low-performance organizations. So this is the new metric in the current era that becomes very important. Now, what does it all fit into your current architecture, right? You would say, in all our organizations, we already have a number of different systems out there. One way to kind of look at the framework is there was a amazing blog that was written by Greylock Partners, venture capitalist colleague Jerry Chan, and essentially all the systems that we use can be kind of categorized into three types of systems of records, which is where your CRMs and our ERPs that provides the record keeping, the system of engagement, which is where the users actually engage. And then, in fact, this will be the previous paradigm. There was only 2 layers, and now, when he wrote the blog, he introduced this middle layer, which is called the system of intelligence. We are now in an era of AI first, and the system of intelligence is going to get embedded in almost everything that we do, not just learning, but as you are seeing that AI is just penetrating everywhere. So when we try to apply this framework to learning, the way it evolves is that your current learning management system, which might get evolved into just a learning record system, they are essentially your system of record. What we need to empower to build the system of intelligence in learning is ability to empower our subject matter experts. And essentially, there are 3 tools that are, the great news is that there are tools available now that were not available before that can drive the democracy and the velocity of knowledge. I call it curate, create, and coach, and I'll go into some details and show you how it works. And with that, the new system of engagement is essentially you make that learning available right inside the app, so you don't even have to go to a specific app for doing specific thing, but you are working in a particular application and you can get that learning. You could also get a conversational assistant, a conversational UI with your own personal assistant. We call it EdCast. And then you can also take now that same learning and make it more immersive using AR and VR. So these are the new systems across the system of records, system of intelligence, and system of engagement that are emerging in this new peer-to-peer learning and ability to drive more contextual and relevancy. So the one way to look at how we can get more power out of this whole democratization is I'll show you here just a back of the envelope calculation that any L&D team can actually create $1.5 billion of value in their organization in just 6 months if you can assemble at least 1,000 SME, and obviously the numbers will change if you have higher or lower number of SMEs, and I'll come to that right in a few minutes. So the 3 tools that are really interesting and amazing is number 1 is curate. So we have now the ability that there's content everywhere. Charles mentioned about we have gone from a paucity of content to an abundance, and what the AI allows us to do now is the ability to take a massive amount of knowledge and learning content from internal, external, free and open content, premium content, and then actually mash that with the role taxonomy and ontology and create machine recommendations, which is personalized to what we are working on, and that drives the machine level of curation. But there is also the ability to now do the last mile, and what we've invented is a curate button, and I think we all need a curate button so that we, as a subject matter expert in whatever area, we believe that everyone has expertise in some area. We could take the flow of knowledge and which we think is good for our teams, and as a coach for our team, we could hit the curate button. Here is an example where I am running a channel on mindfulness inside EdCast, and I have the ability to now look at 14 items that the machine has curated for me, and I'm able to curate it. So this is an incredible ability for me to get my teams learning with me and have the ability to coach them very without spending too much time on it, but actually curating based on what my learning is. The other interesting technology is really the ability to create playlists. So we are all very familiar with creating playlists for our music, and I would love to learn from learn or discover new music from people who have really great taste for music, and all I do is that I don't have time to discover new music, but I would just copy the playlist from someone whom I respect for their taste of music. So Same thing that we could do here is to drive that faster velocity of knowledge flow. You have subject matter experts in every area who would be maintaining their playlist based on both this machine curated and personally curated content, and the others who want to learn from them could just follow those playlists. So these two are very powerful technology in terms of the curate button and the playlist button that never existed in the previous world or the current world of course-driven learning. The second big capability that we have today with the mobile first is the create button, which is right on our mobile phone. We have a 1080p and a high definition HD quality camera where we could just press a button and we could record short videos almost like our own short TED Talk, and either explain a concept or an insight, or even point the camera to something that you would like people to show it in real time. And this is an amazing capability to create a large number of your own video libraries, which are highly contextual and very specific to your own business and your products and your services and your markets, and helping your subject matter experts to unlock and their tacit knowledge without having to write long articles or blogs or videos, blogs or PowerPoints or courses. They can just create short videos, and they can all be then sequenced inside a playlist. There's another tool available that we have created, which we call it as Guide Me, but that enables any person who wants to share their knowledge and create knowledge from their own computers, and using screencast, but then creating multiple screencasts of actually a concept that they want to explain through a presentation video or a simulation that is happening right on their computer, and then and creating a step-by-step, an interactive guide of click here, click there, and then publish that again as a smart bite, gets that curated again through the machine curation, so that the people who are working on that exact thing at the point of the need, it gets queued up and shows up in the queue. The other pieces that you can take now some of this screencast that you've created, the walkthroughs, and sequence them and create a micro course. So you're essentially giving the power of creating micro courses to pretty much anyone who has an expertise in any particular area. So you're essentially democratizing the ability to create knowledge. The third C of the knowledge creation is the coaching. So you have the ability to take the same video capability, and you can invite your team members, and those team members can actually ask you any questions and have a periodical coaching and mentoring sessions that can be created on the fly, or it can be scheduled as you need it. So with that, I would end the session here and open it up for any questions.
Excellent, Karl. Thank you so much for that. That was great. We've had questions come in. So if you guys have anything else you'd like to ask Karl or Charles, please enter it into the Q&A box now. But I have a few questions here, Karl. And I think this is probably better for both to address, and this really gets it into the heart of what you guys are both discussing here. This is from Claire, and the question is, Karl, if you want to start this off and maybe hand it over to Charles for his input as well. The question is there a method to clearly measure the input and output of informal learning?
Yeah, I'll let Charles, you go first, and then I can answer.
Oh, sure, fine. I think that's a really interesting question, because that is obviously the first question that is very often asked about how do we measure the output of informal learning. I would take a step back and say, how do we measure the output of structured formal learning? The answer to that is there's all sorts of methodologies, but most of them are focused on measuring learning rather than measuring behavior change. In other words, the only definition I can give to learning is it's demonstrated as a change in behavior. In other words, people do things differently, hopefully better, than they did before. I would challenge that most structured learning doesn't do that measurement. But when we think about it, actually, if we're going to measure whether an experience changes the way someone does their job and improves their performance, it's no different to measuring whether a course changes the way someone does their job and helps them develop. So I would answer that by simply saying there are no learning metrics that have any value at all to anyone other than the learning professional. You know, learning metrics might be useful to help a learning and development team, department reflect on what it's doing and change the way it's doing it, or reinforces what they're doing. But if we're going to look at measuring, we have to look at metrics which are output metrics, which are stakeholder metrics, and the answer is we're humans. You know, so being able to carry out a paired experiment where we isolate variables and so on within the workplace, or even within, you know, a classroom and then in the workplace, is extremely difficult and probably not worthwhile even thinking about. But if we're going to measure that learning that occurs through experience, through practice, through all those sorts of things, we can measure that. We can see. In fact, I've just written a white paper with a chief learning officer for the world's largest offshore wind turbine manufacturers, and there they looked internally in the organization to understand what characteristics high performers had, and the characteristics they had were the major characteristic that correlated with high performance was challenging work, challenging assignments, stretch assignments. So I think we can look at it at that level rather than thinking about, you know, do we test someone as to, can we check whether they retain something in their head for a short time before they do their exam. So I hope that answers the question, but I've not seen a solution which, or let me say it again, I've not seen an informal learning situation which can't be measured by understanding what the outputs are and do they match expectations, and if they don't and they're adrift, identifying why they might be adrift. So I think it's a bit of a fallacy, this whole sort of arguments are put up saying, throwing the hands in the air saying we can't measure informal learning. You can measure informal learning, you just measure the performance change.
Excellent. Excellent. Very helpful. Thank you for that. And we'll move into another question here. I think it's a very good question for Karl. This is from Elizabeth, and this goes with, I'm trying to combine a couple questions here because a lot came in. Karl, can you explain a little more about how the coaching component works and how that is used, or give an example of how that is used for coaching?
Yeah, sure. Well, so, you know, coaching could be both, from a format standpoint, it could be one-to-one and it could be one-to-many. And essentially, you could set up coaching groups in a system like ours. And you could have coaching for you know, by a particular coach, or you could have coaching groups based on topics, so that other coaches could come in if they can weigh in, if they want to, as an expert on that particular topic. But you know, the most important capability that you can leverage of being mobile, you know, the fact that everyone has a mobile phone with them all the time, and we are all working in different time zones, is that you have the ability to be live and real time with the group that you're coaching, and you can set up a live AMA or a coaching session on your mobile phone. It's very effortless, both for the coach to kind of just you know, bring the phone screen in front of them, and you are live in front of your you know, teams that wants to be coached, or an individual. They could ask you questions, and they could be even in a noisy environment, and they can just type the question. They are able to see you live. You are able to show with your own phone wherever you are. You can even show something that you would want them to coach. Like, let's say if you're in a retail organization and you want to see in a retail store, you want to show a behavior of a customer service person, you could just take your phone out and you can actually capture that, and you are able to coach now your team, you know, back in other stores, that what is the right way of doing this customer service. So this is a kind of very experiential way of ability to coach both personally as you as an individual. The mobile phone allows you to point and shoot, and with your camera on your phone to everything around you to help to create that experience for the other people, and you are able to keep those coaching sessions as recorded sessions so that the other folks who couldn't join, due to time zone or meeting conflicts, are able to now build upon those, learn from those libraries or those previous coaching sessions. So the mobile phone kind of changes everything. If we are able to leverage this, the video and the live stream capability, there's Facebook Live and there's Twitter, Periscope out there. But what was needed was an enterprise-grade security that you focused on to be able to create smaller groups. And so it's a pretty sophisticated technology that is needed to combine the audio, video, the coaching capability, and security to make that happen.
Excellent, Karl. That's a great answer. Thank you for that. And move this back to Charles for a question here. You spoke a little bit early on just trying to define the different types of learning, and there's been a couple questions come up. Can you just provide a little more information about what you specifically meant by explicit and tacit learning?
Sure. When we talk about explicit knowledge, we're just talking about codified knowledge. That which is written down, that's defined, and that we can read and access as codified knowledge. Whereas tacit knowledge, or tacit information, I guess, is more tied up with insight and experience. So let me give you an example. We'll codify, for example, processes within our organization. So we will produce explicit information around processes in our organization. But when we come to use those processes, if they don't work, or if we need something more, we're likely to need to access some tacit information. That's some insight from someone who's used it or someone who knows it. It's information that's in someone's head. And I think that when you look at certainly when you look at the knowledge work, within knowledge work, we're dealing with far more tacit information than we are with codified explicit information. So that's really, I think, the way to look at them. And the question that raises then, and I think it's a big question for learning professionals, is how do we exploit that tacit knowledge? And Karl has just explained with the EdCast tools and approaches, that's a way to be able to capture insight, capture expertise, and share it very, very quickly. It's not something that you spend weeks preparing and delivering up in packages of courses. It's a way in which you can move from unknowing to knowing to learning to unlearning to relearning and so on through that process. And I think that also comes to the fore. There was another question there, if I may, just for a moment, Jeff, around the courses and the campaign dichotomy, the difference between courses and campaign. And again, I think it's very clear. Courses are based around focusing on knowledge and skills. There might be attitudes, behaviors, competencies, and so on, but it's based around the concept. Courses are based around the concept that we learn in order to work, whereas campaigns are based around experiences in the workplace. They're based around how we can learn from work rather than learning to work. And I'll just give you a very quick example of, again, a third question there around micro-learning. Citibank has done a very good job in terms of a large campaign called their 30-day challenge. And again, if you visit the 70-20-10 Institute site within the next 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, there's a white paper that I've written with the head of learning, the chief learning officer for Citibank for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, where there's an account in terms of their approaches to 70-20-10 and their 30-day challenges. And these challenges are simply challenges that are put out to the workforce to ask them to spend a few minutes each day just to reflect on all sorts of things and then to share with others. So there's a social platform sitting underneath that and so on. And it's very much around changing mindset, of moving the mindset from the organization, the learning professionals, HR, and so on know best, to providing people with resources. So it's moving from this courses to resources model.
Excellent. And actually, I think that was a good answer to those questions that came up. And I know we're not going to be able to get to everybody's question here, so I thank you for putting them in there. And I love some of the creatively written questions that came in. Those are very good. I will try to address all of them after today's webinar. We're down to about 5 minutes. And just to build off of Charles, which was less than 5 minutes, if Charles just had great points about micro-learning, I was wondering if, Karl, if you could talk about this as well. Just the question is, how can companies leverage micro-learning as part of an employee's daily dose of learning? Can you add some more insight into that from what Charles was talking about?
Well, I mean, Charles made an excellent, he gave some fantastic example of sports players in terms of, that they continuously practice, and Rafael's example about continuously learning and learning in the moment of the action. So we need to infuse learning in our daily working, and that's how we drive high performance. And so micro-learning is one way to do that. But just micro-learning and pushing, bite-sized content is not going to help. We need tremendous capability in AI to be able to bring the right content to the right user. And coincidentally, we announced today an acquisition of an AI company to expand on the AI team, because it's very critical to get the AI and the machine learning piece right. And also Charles mentioned about the embedding of learning into the working. So if with all of those pieces of technology coming together, we could create really an environment and where we can create a daily habit of learning, and it becomes more pervasive, it becomes invisible, and it becomes just part of working. So I think we are now at a stage in 2017 that all of this is all coming together, and you can make that daily continuous learning embedded into working as a reality.
Right. And I think that's an excellent point that we can leave this here on, because that ties right back into everything that Charles brought up initially here about bringing the effectiveness of bringing the learning to the point of work, and how that is more useful and retained and applied. I think that's an excellent point there. So again, I want to thank everybody on today's call. We'll wrap it here. I'll have the recording and presentation out to everybody by the end of the week here. And I would like to personally thank Charles Jennings and Karl Mehta for being on today's call. Thank you. I think this is excellent information, and I'm sure with the feedback we've already received, that everybody feels the same way that's been on today's call. So again, thank you everyone for participating today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again.
Great.
Thanks
you
everyone.
very much. Yep.